What if the man you thought didn't belong in business class turned out to be the only one who could save the plane? Stay with me. This story will surprise you. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more heart-stirring stories. Flight 452 hums softly under the amber glow of its business class cabin, bound for Paris from a cool afternoon in Boston. Leather seats gleamed in the low light, champagne flutes catching fragments of sunlight still lingering through oval windows. It was the kind of space where power often whispered louder than engines, a place filled with people who measured time in deals closed and markets won. Victoria Langford leaned back into her seat, her crimson dress a deliberate contrast against the muted palette of gray suits around her. At 34, she had built a reputation as a woman who never flinched. Her consulting firm, once a startup in a rented studio, now spanned continents. Her blonde hair was cut sharply in the style that had graced more than one Fortune magazine cover. Her gaze, cool and calculating, scanned the cabin the way other people read balance sheets. Success had taught her many things, most of all, that trust was a currency more fragile than gold. Across the aisle, a very different picture unfolded. Daniel Archer wrestled with an oversized carry-on and the bright pink unicorn backpack slung over one shoulder. At 36, his broad frame still carried the quiet strength of his Air Force years, though his flight suit had long since been traded for the oil-stained uniform of an aviation maintenance engineer. His short brown hair, trimmed with military neatness, caught the cabin lights as he bent to secure the safety harness for his daughter. Lily Archer, just 7, pressed her nose to the window, curls bouncing as she giggled at the ground crew below. In her hand, she clutched a sketchbook filled with airplanes, each one carefully labeled in a child's uneven handwriting. Her wide eyes mirrored her father's steady blue, but carried something softer, a warmth that had not dimmed despite loss. She lived for moments like this, the magic of giant machines lifting into the sky, and for the stories her father spun on quiet evenings about wings, engines, and a world that once belonged to him thousands of feet above the earth. Further forward, Captain Robert Mitchell adjusted the brim of his cap before settling into the cockpit. At 45, with a weathered calm earned from decades in the air, he was known among his crew as unshakable. He had seen almost everything: ash clouds over Iceland, emergency landings in cornfields, storms that tested both aircraft and nerves. And through it all, he carried the same steady voice, the kind that could tell passengers of turbulence as if pointing out a mountain lake. Beside him, First Officer Jason Ward rubbed his temple, fighting the dull nausea that had crept in since lunch at the terminal. At 38, newly promoted, he told himself it was nothing serious, just a bad sandwich. He would push through. That was what professionals did. Moving through the cabin with practiced grace was Hannah Price, the lead flight attendant. At 30, she seemed to know every gesture before passengers made it, smoothing small troubles before they became disruptions. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, flicked briefly to the man struggling with luggage and the little girl with the backpack. She noted the cool smile of the woman in red. She filed it all away the way a good crew always did. The stage was set. One aircraft, 200 lives, a collection of strangers, each carrying more than just baggage. None of them could have known how the hours ahead would test everything they thought they knew about control, about courage, about what it meant to truly be human, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic. Daniel shifted his weight in the narrow aisle, one hand steadying the bright unicorn backpack on his shoulder, the other struggling with the awkward latch of the child's safety seat. His broad frame seemed almost too large for the space, his movements careful but clumsy under the silent observation of business-class passengers who had perfected the art of polite disdain. He leaned down again, checking the strap across Lily's chest, tugging just enough to make sure it was a snug, then double-checking. Old habits from his flying days that never quite left him. From across the aisle, Victoria Langford's cool voice broke through the quiet hum of the cabin. Some people, she said just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, should consider whether business class really suits them. Her words floated with the practiced cadence of someone used to speaking in boardrooms. Sharp and precise, designed to sting without raising her tone, the effect was immediate. A hedge fund manager behind her smirked into his newspaper. Another passenger chuckled softly, shaking his head as if in shared agreement. It was the kind of laugh Daniel knew too well, The laugh of people who measured worth by brands, by polish, by whether you belonged in a leather seat or in the back of the plane. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, that micro-expression honed from years of discipline. He could have fired back once upon a time. He might have. But Sarah's voice echoed in memory, her hand, weak but warm in his, urging him to promise he would never let pride or anger overshadow their daughter's happiness. He had traded fighter jets for bedtime stories, medals for morning pancakes. And here, in this cabin filled with strangers, he reminded himself of that promise again. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her small voice carrying a sweetness that cut through the tension. Why are those people laughing? She didn't fully understand. But children feel things, tones, silences, glances, long before they can explain them. Her curls bounced as she turned her wide eyes toward him, searching for reassurance. Daniel crouched beside her seat, leveling his gaze with hers, his voice steady and low. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. Some people just make noise when they don't understand. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." He brushed a curl back from her forehead and gave her the smile he always used when storms rolled in, whether outside the window or inside her little heart. Lily grinned, comforted, and reached for her sketchbook. Flipping past pages of propeller planes and cargo jets, she stopped at a half-finished F-22. "Can we finish this one now?" she asked eagerly, her pencil hovering above the page, waiting for him to guide her hand. Daniel chuckled, settling into his seat, pulling the tray table down just enough to turn it into a makeshift drafting board. "All right, co-pilot, what did I tell you about the wings on this one?" "That they're shaped like knives," she said proudly, tracing the sharp angles, "so it can fly higher and faster than all the others." Her excitement was uncontainable, her voice bright in a cabin otherwise filled with muted conversations and the quiet tapping of laptops. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, unused to such unfiltered joy, in a place where silence was often a mark of sophistication. But to Daniel it was a music, pure and unpolished, like the sound of Sarah reading bedtime stories. Victoria sipped her champagne, eyes flicking once more toward the father and daughter. For a moment her expression faltered, something almost human surfacing beneath the polished exterior. But she quickly buried it again beneath practiced indifference. To her, this man with his dated jacket and his little girl's backpack was an anomaly, an interruption in the carefully curated atmosphere of luxury. She returned her attention to the documents on her tablet, though her ears caught every giggle from across the aisle, and so the contrast hung in the air. On one side, quiet judgment wrapped in designer fabric. On the other, a father who chose patience over pride, and a child who saw only wonder in wings and skies. The flight had barely left the ground, but already invisible lines had been drawn. None of them could have imagined how quickly those lines would blur, or how fragile the distance between disdain and gratitude would prove to be once the sky began to shake. The first hours of the flight passed with the gentle rhythm every traveler hopes for. Glasses clinking softly, the steady hum of engines. Lily's pencil scratching happily across her sketchbook. Daniel leaned back for the first time, content to watch his daughter shade the wings of her jet with fierce concentration. Victoria pretended not to notice them, though her eyes flicked across the aisle more often than she admitted to herself. Then, somewhere over the dark sweep of the Atlantic, the calm cracked at 35,000 feet. The plane shuddered, not the casual bump of turbulence, but a violent jolt that rattled overhead bins and sent water glasses sliding across polished tables. A murmur of surprise swept through the cabin. Passengers stiffened in their seats. Lily's crayon slipped, a streak of blue cutting across her page. The lights flickered once, twice, casting long shadows across uneasy faces. And then it came, the acrid scent of burning electronics, sharp and unmistakable. Daniel's head snapped up, instincts sharpening. Years of training buried under civilian life rose in a rush. He could tell from the rhythm of the vibrations that something wasn't right. This wasn't weather. It was mechanical. Up front in the cockpit, Captain Robert Mitchell's hands moved quickly across the panel, muscle memory from decades of emergencies kicking in. Warning lights blinked in urgent reds and ambers. His voice stayed level, but his eyes told a different story as he scanned the readings. Hydraulics are unstable. Engine 2 temperature spike. Electrical bus showing faults. His first officer, Jason Ward, reached for a switch, but his hand trembled. Sweat glistened on his temple. "You all right?" Mitchell asked, his voice still professional, but edged with concern. Jason tried to nod, but his face had gone pale, almost gray. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear his vision. I, I don't... His voice trailed off, words failing him. And then, without warning, his body stiffened before collapsing forward against the harness. Mitchell's gut clenched. He reached over, pulling the yoke back with one hand to steady the aircraft as alarms blared louder. The Boeing listed to starboard, the right wing dipping in a way no passenger needed an aviation degree to feel. From the cabin came gasps, a few sharp cries. Crystal glasses toppled and shattered. In business class, Victoria gripped her armrest, eyes wide, her composure cracking for the first time in years. Around her, laptops snapped shut, papers spilled, murmurs rose into panicked questions. Daniel felt Lily's small hand slip into his, her grip tight, her eyes searching his face for answers. "Daddy." He forced a calm smile, though his chest tightened with a smell of smoke seeping faintly into the cabin. He squeezed her hand once. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just stay buckled." Then the captain's voice filled the air, carried over the intercom. This time, for the first time in his long career, passengers could hear the urgency beneath the practiced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing some technical difficulties. I need to ask, are there any current or former pilots on board, military or civilian? If you have flying experience, please identify yourself immediately." The cabin froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the hum of the engine seemed uncertain, one of them stuttering, coughing as if it too was struggling for breath. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Passengers exchanged fearful glances, some whispering prayers under their breath. Hannah Price, the lead attendant, steadied herself against the seat as she scanned the rows, her eyes searching, pleading for someone to respond. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. His mind flashed back to Sarah, to the promise he'd made in that hospital room to keep himself safe for Lily, to never fly again. But now, with the plane trembling around them, with Lily clutching his hand and 200 lives suspended on failing wings, that promise collided with another, the one he had sworn in every part of his soul to protect her, to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Daniel sat frozen in his seat. The captain's plea still echoed through the cabin, mingling with the uneven thrum of a struggling engine. His mind raced, torn between two promises. One whispered in a hospital room years ago, the other written in every fiber of who he was. Sarah's voice returned to him as clearly as if she were beside him again. Her hand, frail but insistent, was clutching his. "No more risks, Daniel. Lily needs you whole. She needs a father, not a hero." He had nodded through tears, sealing that vow deep inside himself. But then Lily's small fingers squeezed his hand harder, pulling him back to the present. Her eyes, weaned and unblinking, searched his face with the kind of trust that left no room for hesitation. The cabin shook again, rattling trays and sending another ripple of panic through the passengers. He could feel the weight of 200 souls pressing in, the knowledge that silence now meant leaving them all to chance. His throat tightened. He wanted to stay seated, to keep his head down, to honor the promise that had anchored him through grief. Yet even as fear gnawed at him, something deeper pushed back. The old instinct, the one that had steadied him at 30,000 feet with enemy fighters on his tail. A pilot never ignores a call for help. A father never looks away when his child is in danger. Slowly, Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket, his fingers brushing against the smooth leather of his wallet, worn at the edges from years of use. Behind his driver's license and credit cards sat the relic of another life, his Air Force identification. The eagle and shield were still clear under its fading lamination. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Archer, 22nd Fighter Squadron. A photograph of a younger man stared back at him, jaw sharp, eyes hard, the kind of eyes that once measured horizons instead of school schedules. He pulled the card free. Feeling its weight like a decision made, he looked at Lily. Her curls bounced as she lifted her chin, as if she already knew. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling but proud. "You flew the fastest planes in the whole Air Force. You can fly anything. Her words landed with the force of truth, not boastful, not pleading, simply certain. And in that moment, Daniel understood this wasn't about breaking a promise to Sarah. It was about keeping it, keeping Lily safe, whatever it cost him. He stood, his tall frame drawing every eye in the cabin. Conversations hushed. Panic paused, as if the air itself recognized something had shifted. Hannah Price appeared almost instantly at his side, her professional mask slipping as she caught sight of the card in his hand. She read the credentials quickly, her eyes widening with sudden relief. "Are you telling me you can fly this?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Daniel gave a single nod, steady and deliberate. "I can help. Take me to the cockpit." Across the aisle, Victoria Langford froze. She had watched him wrestle with a child's seatbelt, noted the worn jacket, the scuffed sneakers, the juice box instead of champagne. She had measured him and found him lacking. But now, as she watched the way he carried himself, precise, confident, unshaken, her own certainty fractured. The man she had dismissed as out of place suddenly seemed like the only one who truly belonged. Lily straightened in her seat, pride shining through her fear. "That's my daddy," she said to no one in particular, her voice carrying across the tense silence of business class. "He's the best pilot in the world." And with that, Daniel handed the card to Hannah, squared his shoulders, and followed her toward the front of the plane. The passengers watched him go, their hope rising on the back of a man they had overlooked. For Victoria, the taste of champagne still lingered on her tongue, but it had never felt so bitter. Daniel followed Hannah down the narrow aisle, the cabin quieting with every step he'd take. Behind him, Lily's voice rang out again, proud and certain. "My daddy can fly anything." It echoed in the silence like a promise, a tether pulling him forward. When he reached the cockpit door, Hannah keyed in the override. The heavy door clicked open and the world changed. The cockpit was alive with alarms, warning lights flashing across the panels in urgent red and amber. The air carried the acrid bite of overheated wiring, sharper here than in the cabin. Captain Robert Mitchell sat at the controls, his jaw tight, sweat glistening along his temple. His eyes flicked up only briefly when Daniel entered. There was no time for pleasantries, no space for introductions. "First officers down," Mitchell said quickly, his voice clipped but steady. "Severe reaction, unconscious. We've got partial hydraulic failure, electrical instability, and engine 2 is running hot. Storm system dead ahead. I can't fly and run all systems alone." Daniel slid into the jump seat, pulling the spare headset over his ears with practiced ease. His hands moved across the unfamiliar layout, scanning, memorizing, adapting. "Copy that. I'll take communications and systems management. Give me 30 seconds to orient. Then I'm your co-pilot." Mitchell's eyes lingered on him for a heartbeat, weighing the words. But there was something in Daniel's tone, in the calm precision of a man who had spent his life reading skies under fire, that left no room for doubt. He gave a sharp nod and turned back to the controls. Daniel's voice came steady, measured, the cadence of command never truly forgotten. "Boston Center, this is Flight 452 declaring emergency. First officer incapacitated, experiencing partial system failure. Requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable diversion airport. 200 souls on board. 4 hours of fuel remaining." The response crackled through the static, strained but clear. "Flight 452, roger. Nearest field is Cork, Ireland. Runway length is sufficient. Emergency crews alerted. Stand by for vectors." Daniel adjusted a series of switches, noting hydraulic pressure fluctuating between 40 and 60%. Engine 2 still running in the yellow range. He spoke each number aloud, his tone even, his rhythm controlled, creating a steady pulse in the chaos. Mitchell gripped the yoke, keeping the aircraft level against shuddering turbulence. "Electricals choppy, navigation unstable. You'll have to track manually." "I've got it," Daniel said, already recalibrating the flight management system, compensating for failing instruments. He looked out through the windscreen. Storm clouds towered like mountains of darkness, streaked with lightning that lit the sky in violent bursts. "Weather's closing fast. If we're going to make Cork, we'll need to descend early before hydraulics degrade further." Mitchell glanced sideways at him, a flicker of relief crossing his stern features. "Glad you're here, Colonel." Daniel didn't answer. He focused on the instruments, his hands moving with the controlled urgency of a man who had spent 2,000 hours trusting machines to respond in war. This wasn't combat, but it demanded the same calm, the same unflinching clarity. Behind them, Jason Ward slumped against his harness, unconscious, pale. The faint rasp of his breathing was a reminder of what waited if they failed. Daniel steadied his voice, calling out altitude, speed, pressure, every metric that mattered, anchoring Mitchell's hands on the yoke with data he could trust. The storm ahead filled the windscreen now, black and immense, alive with electricity. The aircraft shuddered again, as if bracing itself. Daniel's pulse quickened, but his voice did not waver. "Work in 90 minutes under normal conditions," he said evenly. "But nothing about tonight is normal." Mitchell gave a grim nod, adjusting their heading. Together, two men who had never met before, one a veteran captain, the other a retired fighter pilot turned mechanic, prepared to guide 200 lives through fire and storm. And outside the cockpit windows, the Atlantic stretched endlessly and unforgiving, daring them to falter. The storm swallowed them whole. One moment the horizon was distant and gray. The next, it was a wall of black, alive with streaks of white fire. Lightning flashed across the windscreen, so bright it seared the eyes, illuminating the cockpit in violent bursts before plunging it back into shadow. The Boeing jolted hard to the left, passengers gasping as overhead bins rattled and glasses crashed to the floor. Captain Robert Mitchell fought the yoke with both hands, steady as ever, his knuckles pale against the controls. Beside him, Daniel's voice cut through the chaos like a metronome, measured and precise. Altitude holding 33,000, airspeed 290 knots. Hydraulic pressure fluctuates 45 to 55, and engine 2 is still in yellow. You're within parameters. Mitchell nodded, eyes fixed on the artificial horizon. "Keep feeding me numbers." Daniel pressed his headset closer, switching frequencies with a flick of his wrist. "Shannon Control, Flight 452 declaring emergency. 200 souls on board. First officer incapacitated, partial system failure. Requesting priority approach vectors to Cork." He paused only long enough for the controller's reply, then continued without missing a beat. "Confirm emergency crews standing by for medical evacuation. First officer requires immediate care." Every detail spoken aloud, every variable accounted for. It became the rhythm that steadied them both, a language born from discipline and necessity. Mitchell flew, Daniel calculated, and between them the aircraft clawed through the storm. In the cabin, the contrast was stark. Panic had begun to unravel composure. A woman sobbed into her hands. A man whispered prayers in a rapid French. Another clutched the armrest so tightly his knuckles went white. Even Victoria Langford, who had faced down hostile boards and billion-dollar deals, bowed her head in something close to prayer. Her polished exterior cracked under the weight of helplessness. For once, she could not buy control. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, Lily Archer sat with remarkable calm, her sketchbook resting on her lap, the pencil steady in her small hand despite the jolts. She had drawn the outline of a sleek jet, wings sharp against the page, and now she leaned forward to add clouds, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Around her, fear clung to every row, but Lily's quiet focus was a kind of defiance. When the man beside her began to hyperventilate, eyes darting wildly, Lily reached into her unicorn backpack and pulled out a stick of gum. She held it out with the innocence of a child who didn't understand panic, but understood kindness. "My daddy says chewing gum helps," she offered brightly. "It makes the popping in your ears go away." The man blinked, stunned, then accepted it with trembling hands. The gesture, simple as it was, softened the edges of fear around him. Victoria looked over, eyes catching the child's small act of comfort. For a moment, she forgot the storm outside, forgot the crack of thunder that rattled the windows. She saw only a little girl steadying a stranger with nothing more than a piece of gum and unshakable faith in her father. And for the first time, Victoria's chest tightened with something unfamiliar, something she would later recognize as humility. Back in the cockpit, another flash of lightning lit Daniel's face, his expression carved in calm. "Descent recommended in 20 minutes, Captain," he said evenly. "Any longer, hydraulics may not hold. Emergency crews confirm standby at Cork." Mitchell's jaw set. "Then we ride it out until then." The plane shuddered again, tossing passengers against their restraints. But inside that fragile metal tube, hurtling through fire and thunder, a rhythm held steady. Mitchell's hands on the yoke, Daniel's voice calling numbers, Lily's crayon scratching softly across paper. And somehow, between those three things, hope endured. The coastline of Ireland finally broke through the storm, runway lights at Cork piercing the rain-streaked darkness like faint beacons of hope. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's voice carried the same measured cadence it had since the crisis began. Altitude 3,000, speed 145 knots. Hydraulic pressure steady at 52%. Approach stabilized. Wind shear warning, Mitchell muttered, hands steady on the yoke, though the muscles in his forearms flexed with strain. Outside, the crosswind slammed against the fuselage, shoving the Boeing sideways. Rain lashed across the windshield in sheets, erasing visibility until the runway emerged again through the blur, a narrow strip of salvation rushing toward them. In business class, tension snapped taut. A woman screamed as the plane dipped sharply. A businessman clutched his seatbelt as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. Victoria Langford, who had faced financial storms without blinking, now felt hot tears spill down her cheeks. She pressed her palms together, lips moving in a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. But across the aisle, Lily Archer's small voice rose above the chaos. "It's okay," she said, clear and steady, despite the tremors shaking the cabin. Her pencil rolled off the tray table, but she didn't flinch. She looked at the pale faces around her and lifted her chin. "My daddy will do it. He promised Mommy he'd always keep me safe." Her conviction landed with more force than any announcement. Strangers glanced at her, the quiet authority of a child steadying their frayed nerves. Even Victoria's tears caught in her throat as she turned to look at the little girl who believed so completely. 500 feet, Daniel called, his voice unwavering as the ground rushed closer. Speed 143 knots, centerline drifts right, correcting required. His tone was not frantic, but precise, like a surgeon naming each step of an operation. Mitchell adjusted, fighting the gusts, but the wind howled, shoving the plane off course again. 200 feet, Daniel announced. Crosswind at 15 knots. Too high drift. Recommend go around. Mitchell's jaw clenched. The runway was right there, the wheels almost touching the earth, but trust ran deeper than instinct. Go around, he confirmed, slamming the throttles forward. The engines roared in protest, pushing the aircraft skyward again, pinning passengers back into their seats. The cabin erupted. Screams tangled with sobs as the Boeing clawed back into the clouds. Loose items skittered down the aisles, cups and papers scattering like debris in the wind. Victoria gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles whitened, her breath coming in sharp bursts. This was not power she could control, not a deal she could negotiate. For the first time in her carefully built life, she felt utterly powerless. Through it all, Daniel's voice never faltered. Positive climb, gear up, speed 175 knots, hydraulic pressure stable, flaps retracted, we're climbing clean. Each call-out was deliberate, grounding Mitchell's hands on the controls, anchoring the terrified passengers in something steadier than their fear. Back in her seat, Lily leaned against the window, her curls brushing the glass. She whispered again, almost like a lullaby to herself and to anyone close enough to hear. Daddy's got this. He always does. And as the plane disappeared once more into the storm, her faith in him became the one thread holding the cabin together. Not champagne, not power, not prayers whispered too late, but the quiet certainty of a child who believed her father could guide them through the dark. The second approach began with silence, the kind that comes when hope hangs by a thread. The cabin lights glowed dim against faces drained of color, eyes fixed forward, breaths held as if the act of exhaling might tip the balance. In the cockpit, Daniel's voice steadied the air like the rhythm of a heartbeat. 3,000 feet on glide slope, speed 145 knots, hydraulic pressure holding at 55%. Captain Robert Mitchell tightened his grip on the yoke, every muscle in his arms locked with determination. Outside, the storm had softened, but not relented, rain streaking the windshield, crosswinds still testing their resolve. He adjusted carefully, aligning the nose of the aircraft with the glowing line of runway lights below. 2,000 feet, Daniel called, his tone even, deliberate, stabilized. Recommend continuing. His calm precision made the chaos feel almost orderly, like each number was a stone laid down on a path leading them home. In the cabin, passengers clutched one another's hands. Victoria sat rigid, her breath coming in sharp bursts, but her eyes shifted toward Lily. The child was whispering again, head tilted against the window, curls framing her face. "Daddy's got this," she murmured, as if her words alone were strong enough to steady the wings. 1,000 feet, Daniel announced. Approach stabilized, slight crosswind, adjust right 10 degrees. Mitchell corrected, sweat dripping along his temple, though his hands never trembled. 500 feet, Daniel continued. Speed 143 knots. Glide slope is good. Crosswind within limits. Continue. The runway lights grew larger, clearer, until they filled the windshield. Daniel's cadence grew sharper now, each word like the tick of a clock counting down. 200 feet, centerline tracking true. Speed 142. Decision altitude reached. Mitchell breathed once, deep and steady. We're committed. 100 feet, Daniel said. Wind shear warning inactive. Flare recommended. Mitchell pulled gently, eyes locked on the runway. The wheels struck hard, bouncing once before catching with a jarring thud that sent gasps through the cabin. For a heartbeat, the aircraft seemed undecided, skidding against wet pavement. Then the nose gear came down, and Daniel's voice cut in sharp. Reverse thrust engaged, speed 160, brake temps rising, hydraulic pressure holding. The engines roared, the brakes groaned, and the plane slowed, fighting the slick surface. Speed 100, Daniel called, 80, 60, 30, and then stillness. The massive jet shuddered to a final halt at the very edge of the runway, emergency vehicles already racing toward it through sheets of rain. For a moment, no one moved. Then the cabin erupted. Strangers embraced, obs broke free, applause thundered through the narrow space, filling it with relief so overwhelming it felt electric. Hannah Price, usually unflappable, wiped tears from her eyes as she hurried down the aisle, helping passengers steady themselves. Victoria buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the release of it. Across from her, Lily clapped with all the earnestness of a child, her little voice carrying above the roar. "I told you Daddy would do it." In the cockpit, Mitchell powered down the engines, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He turned to Daniel, and for the first time in decades, words failed him. Instead, he reached out his hand. Daniel took it firmly, the two men locking eyes in silent recognition of what they had just carried together. Mitchell's voice came out rough but sincere. "The Air Force lost a hell of a pilot when you retired. Tonight, you saved us all." Daniel removed his headset, the weight of the moment pressing in at last. He didn't answer with bravado, only a quiet nod, his breath heavy with exhaustion. In his mind, he thought of Sarah, of the promise he had made, and of the small girl waiting just outside the cockpit door who had never doubted him. Not for a second. Outside the aircraft, the rain still fell in silver sheets, washing foam and rubber from the runway. Reporters had already gathered, cameras raised, eager for the story of the passenger pilot who saved 200 lives. But Daniel wanted no spotlight. He carried Lily in his arms, her curls damp against his shoulder. And when questions flew at him, "How did you do it? Will you give a statement?" He shook his head. His only words were, "I need to get my daughter someplace safe." Victoria Langford watched from a few steps away, her designer dress wrinkled, makeup smudged by tears. Hours earlier, she had dismissed this man as out of place, unworthy of the seat he sat in. Now she saw him turn his back on headlines, on fame, on everything she had once believed mattered. And in his refusal, she saw a truth she had long forgotten. "Daddy," Lily whispered sleepily, tugging at his collar, "can we have spaghetti tonight?" She turned her head, spotting Victoria lingering in the terminal, looking both lost and out of place. "She can come too. We always have enough." The words, innocent and unfiltered, cut through the noise louder than any camera flash. Daniel glanced at Victoria. His first instinct was to politely refuse, but something in her expression, loneliness, weariness, the sharp edges of a woman who had fought too many battles alone, made him pause. He heard Sarah's voice again, the way she had always opened their table to anyone in need, no matter how little they had. He nodded slowly. There's a diner near the hotel. It's not much, but the food's good. You're welcome to join us. The diner smelled of frying onions and brewed coffee, its fluorescent lights buzzing softly above cracked vinyl booths. Menus with faded pictures lay on the table, far removed from the linen and silver service Victoria was accustomed to. But when Lily slid into the booth and began arranging packets of sugar like tiny airplanes, laughter spilled from her lips, and something in Victoria's chest loosened. Over plates of spaghetti and chicken fingers, Daniel spoke not with grandeur, not with the polish of a speech, but with the quiet honesty of a man who had loved deeply. He told stories of Sarah, how they had met at an air show where she teased him for looking too serious, how she believed presence was more valuable than medals, how her final request had been simple, to raise Lily with love, not with pride or fear. Victoria listened, her fork resting untouched, her phone buzzing again and again on the table. Messages from her team in Paris, reporters demanding statements, numbers, deals, schedules, all the things she had once thought defined her. She turned the screen over, face down, and for the first time in years, ignored it. Lily leaned across the booth, sauce on her chin, eager to share. Mama used to say, there's always room for one more friend at the table. That's why we invited you. The words landed with the kind of weight no corporate victory ever had. Victoria swallowed hard, feeling tears sting again, but different this time, not of fear, but of recognition. She had built an empire, yes, but in the process she had lost the very thing this child offered so freely: connection. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes soft as he cut Lily's chicken into smaller bites. Sarah used to tell me that success isn't about having the most. It's about meaning the most to someone. The diner was plain, the food ordinary, but to Victoria it felt extraordinary. In that booth with a widowed father, a little girl with sauce-stained cheeks, and the memory of a woman she had never met, she realized she was standing at the edge of a choice: to keep climbing the cold mountain she had built for herself, or to sit here, to be present, to choose warmth over walls. For once, she didn't measure the decision. She simply stayed, listening, laughing softly when Lily explained how French fries could demonstrate aerodynamics. And when her phone buzzed again, she left it face down, untouched, as if the world could wait while she learned what it truly meant to be human. In the weeks that followed, the world spun its story. Headlines called him a hero. Television anchors marveled at the mechanic father who saved 200 lives. Offers came, book deals, interviews, movie rights, but Daniel Archer wanted none of it. He turned away from cameras, from microphones, from the noise of fame. Each morning he walked Lily to school, packed her lunch, and fixed the squeak in their old apartment radiator. His life remained small by choice, but rich in the ways that mattered most. Victoria Langford returned to Paris, then to New York, to boardrooms and schedules that had once defined her. But something inside her had shifted. The night in the diner stayed with her, the sauce on Lily's chin, the quiet strength in Daniel's voice, the memory of Sarah living through the stories he told. For years, she had built towers of profit, walls of strategy, and fortresses of reputation. Now she began dismantling them, piece by piece. Her company launched new policies for balance: shorter hours, flexible schedules, and support for parents raising children alone. She founded a fund dedicated to single mothers and fathers, quietly pouring her fortune into programs that gave them not just money, but dignity. Shareholders questioned the move. Analysts predicted failure. But Victoria no longer measured her worth in quarterly gains. She measured it in lives touched, in hands steadied, in families given room to breathe. One afternoon, as autumn leaves scattered across Boston sidewalks, an envelope arrived at her office. On the front, in uneven handwriting, was her name. Inside lay a card drawn on construction paper, decorated with airplanes and stick figures. The invitation read, "Please come to my school play. From Lily Archer, for the nice lady on the airplane who needs friends." Tucked in with it was a short note in Daniel's handwriting. "She insisted you be invited. We'll understand if you're too busy." Victoria sat at her desk, the city skyline behind her, and stared at the card for a long time. The weight of every choice she had made pressed in. Busy had always been her excuse. But for the first time, she cleared her schedule, booked no driver, no entourage. She boarded a flight in coach. That evening, she sat in a crowded elementary school auditorium, the air filled with the smell of crayons and construction paper, juice boxes, and anticipation. Parents jostled with phones and cameras. Children peeked from behind cardboard sets, and then the curtain rose. On stage, Lily appeared in a costume made of poster board and tinfoil, playing the role of a brave little airplane that flew not because it was the biggest or the strongest, but because it had the biggest heart. Her voice rang out, proud and clear, and when she spotted Victoria in the audience, she waved with the unfiltered joy of a child who believed her invitation had been answered. Afterward, as juice and cookies were passed around in the cafeteria, Lily introduced her to her classmates with innocent candor. "This is the lady my daddy helped find her heart." Daniel blushed, apologizing for his daughter's bluntness. But Victoria only smiled, because children often spoke truths adults buried too deep to name. Standing in that simple cafeteria surrounded by laughter, she realized she had won battles that never mattered and forfeited the one that did. The fight to remain human in a world obsessed with power. Daniel never claimed to be a hero. He was just a father in a worn jacket, carrying a unicorn backpack, choosing love as his compass. But perhaps that was the point. Heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they are men who fix airplanes by day and tell bedtime stories by night. And maybe in the end, the true measure of a life is not the heights we've climbed, but the hands we've held steady along the way. The story of Daniel Archer and his daughter Lily aboard Flight 452 offers a profound lesson in humility, courage, and the transformative power of human connection. Daniel, a former fighter pilot turned mechanic, chose love over pride, prioritizing his daughter's safety and happiness above societal judgments. His quiet strength in the face of crisis, stepping into the cockpit to save 200 lives despite a promise to avoid such risks, reminds us that true heroism lies not in seeking glory, but in acting selflessly when others need us most. Meanwhile, Victoria Langford's journey from cold judgment to heartfelt change teaches us that success, when measured only by wealth or status, can leave us empty. It was Lily's innocent faith and Daniel's unwavering love that showed her a different path, one where presence and kindness outweigh power. This story stirs the heart, urging us to reflect on our own values. Are we building walls or opening our tables to others? It challenges us to look beyond appearances, to value the quiet courage in everyday people, and to choose connection over isolation. Let's take this lesson into our lives. Embrace humility, act with courage, and cherish the bonds that make us human. What part of this story moved you? How has a moment of kindness or courage changed your perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation alive. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories of hope, healing, and second chances that remind us what truly matters. Join our community, and let's inspire each other to live with heart.